Let's say we're in the Python REPL, and we'd like to know what an object is all about. What questions can we ask of that object, and how do we ask those questions? The scenario is, we're either in the Python REPL, or we've used the built-in breakpoint function to drop into the Python debugger within our code. We're within some sort of interactive Python environment. For example, we might be running this file, which we've put a breakpoint call in to drop into a Python debugger. And we've used the pdb interact command to start a Python REPL. We have a letter counts variable that refers to some sort of object. We want to know what this object is all about. What questions could we ask of this object? Well, to start with, we could simply refer to the object and then hit enter. We've typed the name of a variable that points to an object, and now we see the programmer-readable representation for that object. Often, this string representation tells us the type of the object, as well as some data that the object might be storing. But what if the type isn't very clear? For example, here, it seems like we have a counter object. But what does that mean? That's not one of Python's built-in types. Let's use Python's type function to see what type of object we're working with. Remember that class and type are synonyms. So this object's class is counter, which lives in Python's collections module. That's helpful to know. What if we wanted to look up a bit of documentation on a particular object? Well, now that we know this object's type, we could look up that documentation for this type online. But since we're in the Python REPL, let's see if we can use the built-in help function for that instead. If we pass our letter counts variable to the built-in help function, we'll see some documentation on this counter class. It looks like counter accepts an iterable, and it makes an object that acts like a dictionary, where the elements in the given iterable are the keys in that dictionary, and the values in the dictionary are the counts of those elements, meaning the number of times that those elements occur in the iterable. And here are some examples shown for how to use counter. Keep in mind that the output from the help function isn't a replacement for the documentation you might find online for an object. It's usually shorter, but that brevity can be nice sometimes. What if we specifically want to know what attributes an object has? Well, we could pass that object to the built-in dir function. This shows us all the methods and attributes that exist on this object, but there's no way to tell what is a method and what is an attribute. We could try to use the built-in help function to figure that out, or we could access one of these attributes to see what it is. Turns out this one is a method, and in fact, for counter, I happen to know that all of these attributes are actually methods. Most Python objects also work with the built-in vars function. The vars function returns a dictionary that shows all of the attributes that live directly on an object, so counter objects have no attributes. But this args object that the argparse module gave us does have attributes. This object is an argparse.namespace object, and it has a single file attribute. The keys in the dictionary that vars returns represent the attribute names on the object, and the values represent the values of those attributes. Keep in mind that these are only the attributes that exist on the object. This doesn't include attributes that might exist on the object's class. Also, the vars function doesn't work for every object. It only works for objects that have a dunder-dict dictionary to store their attributes, which most objects do in Python. But many of the built-in object types like list and dictionary don't store their attributes this way, so they don't work with the built-in vars function. Those are the most common ways that I inspect objects in Python: type, help, dir, and vars. But they're not the only ways. For example, if you have a module object, you can often see where that module lives by looking at its dunder file attribute. And if you have a class, and you'd like to know what other classes it inherits from, you can look at its dunder bases attribute to see its direct parent classes. And you can look up its dunder mro attribute to see all of its ancestor classes. Also, if you're looking to ask questions of the objects within your code, you may want to look into Python's inspect module. When I'm in the Python REPL or the Python debugger and I'm wondering how a specific object works, I use one of four functions: the type function to see the class of an object, the help function to see some documentation, the dir function to see all of the attributes and methods that that object supports, and the vars function to see the attributes that live directly on that object.